Hey everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I hope that you enjoyed your long weekend. Very nice to have. I know that we've been talking about the Treaty of Versailles in class because we're doing a simulation, but you all also have a quiz on Friday, and I just wanted to note what actually went down at the Treaty of Versailles, so I thought I'd do this quick video. We're kicking it off with a local history photo. This is actually the Alpine, we used to call it the Alpine Boat Basin. It is soldiers marching via the boat basin to the Hudson River to go down to Hoboken to then go down, to cross the Atlantic to go overseas. So it's kind of an interesting local history. If you live in the area of Cresskill or that region, you've probably been to the Alpine Boat Basin. A couple of things that before we get to the Treaty of Versailles, I'm just going to note, remember that Russia actually leaves the war. It's a pretty big, significant part of World War One, and it's right before the U.S. comes into the war. So kind of think of those two things as both happening in 1917, the same time that Wilson is delivering his speech to Congress, about unrestricted submarine warfare and all of that. Is around the same time that Russia is undergoing a revolution that happens kind of in two seasons of 1917. There's the February Revolution, where the Tsar abdicates his throne, and there are some changes made to the political system. There's a provisional government, the Russian legislative body, the Duma. There's a provisional government, and the decision is made to stay in the war. So this is throughout the entire summer of 1917, and this is led by Kerensky. Eventually, there's some competition with the Petrograd Soviets. These are kind of groups that are meeting up, labor-oriented, military-oriented, and these groups largely want to see an end to the war. And we see a large-scale revolution in October. This is also related to the return of Vladimir Lenin, who was in exile, was a known Marxist. Germany sends him back to Russia conveniently in April, and he really begins to campaign on behalf of the Bolsheviks, and we see a idea of a violent revolution that's going to stop capitalism, stop imperialism, and ultimately led by a group of elites. One of the things that makes Lenin's version of Marxism so unique is this idea that there will be intellectual elites at the helm to kind of lead the proletariat toward this revolution and institute, what will become socialism and then communism. Lenin will work with Leon Trotsky, who is another Marxist. And, just to give you a sense of the Bolsheviks, sometimes this gets referred to as Bolshevism, seen oftentimes interchangeably with Marxism, even though it's a specific strand of that, or the communists. Really, this is a group of people who use the word Bolshevik as to explain majority party. There are other parties as well, and they see the war as really an act of imperialism, and the Bolsheviks will gain the majority in this independent Petrograd Soviet. Leon Trotsky is going to be really influential there. And ultimately, in October, we see the Russian Revolution. We really do see a violent revolution as well as an appeal to soldiers and workers and a move out of the war. Russia loses a great deal of land in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and signs a peace treaty with Germany. There is a large-scale civil war that occurs until the 1920s, and this is the whites versus the reds being the Bolsheviks, and ultimately the allies like the United States will continue to fight against the whites, and we've heard some of this in the conference that we've been having, but just to give you a little bit of background for the quiz, You can see some of the shaded land. That is the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. You can see it's a very significant, sizable land, becomes really important, and ultimately goes to Germany. When Germany loses the war, a big question is what happens to the land that was ceded by Russia to Germany, and this ultimately will be the space of a large number of independent states. Keep in mind a little bit about Wilson's 14 points, and remember, he's an academic. He saw moral diplomacy as really the key necessary thing that would be the antidote to European imperialism, military aggression, all the things that started the war. The idea was to kind of reverse some of that. So his plans for peace is kind of based on a progressive notion of liberalism, the idea that there can be a very kind of hands-on approach. Nationalism, to some degree, is a part of this through the lens of self-determination. And this is also going to be more openness with international relations. So there's a couple of parts that Wilson believed. One is a faith in government to solve international problems. There's kind of three themes that really focus most of the 14 points, which are longer than the excerpt that you have from class. One is to create new nations out of weakened empires. So we have several empires that collapsed as a result of World War I. The Ottoman Empire, the Austria-Hungarian Empire, and the Russian Empire all essentially collapse. New nation states develop, and some of this is based on ethnic lines and self-determination. Poland would be an example. There's also an effort to try to create new international rules and frameworks. So this is freedom of the seas, no more secret treaties, reducing militarism, so not having so much arms build up, no secret treaties like the Sykes-Picot Treaty between England and France. And of course, the big kind of apple of the eye for Wilson was to create a League of Nations, which was to avoid any future wars. This was going to be kind of a problem-solving committee that would address, issues between nations. Some of the new states that get created, and we'll look at them on the map, of course, Czechoslovakia, Turkey, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Austria, and Poland. So, we can look at new states. There are others as well. And we can also get a sense of Wilson at the Paris Peace Conference. He travels there for months, which is very unusual. Presidents of the United States had not really left the country. Wilson hops on a boat and leaves the country for months to negotiate the Treaty of Versailles. And he really hoped that the 14 points would become kind of an international framework. He does find himself compromising a great deal, and he really didn't want to compromise on the League of Nations. So much of the things that do get compromised relate to the others of the 14 points. He does bring a massive delegation with him, including historians, including a lot of diplomats, but he really doesn't bring a great number of Republicans. So this is not an effort that is going to be bipartisan. In fact, it's actually fairly democratic. And, with a capital D, this becomes problematic when it becomes time to ratify the treaty. A couple of things, we do know this, I think, because some of you have been talking about sacrifices made during our simulation. We can really see the number of troops that were mobilized, 42 million in the case of the Allies. If you look at the number of people who are killed in battle, almost 2 million people in Russia, upwards of almost 2 million people in Germany. So really significant losses. You have millions of civilians that also die as a result of the war. So this is like just, incredible destruction. And keep in mind, we have lots of countries involved in the war because of all the various colonies. You also see some of the, horrors. We talked about some of this, just thousands of men who return home in need of a great deal of, care, destruction of a great deal of land. And of course, whoops, that's going to go to a, whoa, no, no, no. Sorry. That's going to go to, you can see my you know, all the things I'm watching on YouTube. And, just devastation and the cost of the war in dollars is extreme. And most of the countries that were involved in the war in Europe are broke at the end of the war. You also do have this massive treaty. This is known as the Paris Peace Treaty. Sometimes we call it the Treaty of Versailles. That's really the treaty that the Allies signed with Germany. And there are other treaties, for example, with Hungary or with the Ottoman Empire. So it's really a series of treaties. The United States and Russia both signed separate treaties with Germany, so they're not part of the Treaty of Versailles. Um, excuse me. Sometimes we hear of the Big Four. This would be the leaders of the Paris Peace Conference. On the French side, George Clemenceau. From the British, the Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. The Italian Prime Minister, Vittorio Orlando. And of course, US Woodrow Wilson. And Russia was not there because they had already left World War One and signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, and Germany was present at the end of the treaty when they ultimately had to sign it, but they were not included in the negotiations. Okay, and this is just an image of the Big Four. Britain and France, maybe they had wanted to weaken Germany, especially France, which is fearful of Germany's attempts to gain power in the future. France also wanted Germany to accept full blame and pay reparations. France also wanted Germany to lose some colonies, and Wilson was somebody who was a little bit more skeptical of harsh punishments for Germany. And of course, within each of these societies, there was debate, and some of the people who are at our particular simulation may not have agreed with these four men. So just kind of keep that in mind. And the 14 points kind of drives the beginning of the Paris Peace Conference. There's a couple of things that maybe we could look at. One is the points 1 through 5, really the effect of like eliminating the causes of World War One, no more colonization, no more national militaries and arming everyone, no more secret treaties. That's going to be very difficult to do because there's just been a continuation of that. There's also this huge effort to create national boundaries, creating new nations based on ethnic lines. So people could actually form their own type of government. Of course, this became questioned when it's like Bolshevism or some other governments that were not as democratic. This whole idea of self-determination is really something that is appealing to many groups of people across the world, since a good number of people were colonized. So that's something to keep in mind. And of course, we have the League of Nations, right? This idea of having a problem-solving organization that can address, problems as they arise, working out grievances, and that this would be something to avoid future conflicts. And Wilson put a lot of academic energy into the design of the League of Nations. Wilson ultimately had to compromise with Britain and France, and ultimately the Treaty of Versailles is the compromised version. So it kind of goes from the 14 points to a whole bunch of compromises. We'll look at some of the major provisions of the Treaty of Versailles. Really you see Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. You also have some countries that are taken away. There is no more Serbia, for example. Some of Germany's colonies were also split up by the victors. So we'll see Japan, for example, getting some of Germany's colonies. Germany also had to accept a war guilt clause, really to accept full blame for the war, and had to pay $33 billion in reparations. The treaty does not at all mention free trade or freedom of the seas, and the treaty is actually drafted in secret, and ultimately Germany is forced essentially to sign it. This is an image of Europe before the war. So just to remind you, you see the Empire of Russia, the Empire of Austria-Hungary, Empire, the Ottomans. After the war, you note the region of Austria-Hungary is completely broken up, Austria and Hungary, but also Yugoslavia. Romania is different size, Czechoslovakia. We also have the country of Poland. You'll notice Latvia, Lithuania, and East Prussia, which is part of Germany, all the way north into Estonia and Finland. So we have a great deal new countries as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. Lots and lots of new countries. Some